They, they
All right.
don't got. Don't get it. Oh, that's sitting down the opposite way. You left or. Look at that, live, be king. I don't think right now, well, I could have done it. I've been used to traveling around Lower and what being done is everything. Pick up one more, drop off and did it. Yeah, pretty well.
Now you have to pick them up too? Okay.
It's really hungry, it's already over there. Yeah, you're calm. She called me a while ago and she said, "Where are you?" I said, "On my way to the Lord's Middle to pick you up." She said, "Well, he says we're late." I said, "You told me 5:30, it's 5:20. I think I do it. I'm almost there."
You said you were late, coach. You're trying to get home.
Well, they don't tell me about that.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
Playing volleyball, people.
Yeah, those were the days.
Like, I don't mind being there. They told me sitting in the park. Sitting there watching the people go by, watching there. No, usually Laura has to go walk the games before.
All right, I got 7:02. Our normal is for the most part.
Yeah.
Let's see what kind of announcements we got.
Didn't go, and didn't take you over
Jolly Friends are leaving out at 9 a.m. Friday morning to head up to Mount Airy for the Autumn Leaves Festival. If you've never been, you should go. It's a good time. We're going to be out of town this weekend, or we would have went. We enjoy it. We got a nice sign from there a couple of years ago, and pretty good food. I will say, if you want the Amish donuts, is it Amish or is it just donuts? If you want the donuts, get in line when you get there, because sometimes they sell out, or sometimes that line's pretty long. They're good, pretty good. Walk for Hunger, how'd that go? Good crowd? Fair crowd? At their own place. Heard Anointed by Grace sang again, right? Oh,
Younger.
okay. Yeah.
I think yesterday I heard over 8,000,
Nice.
but there's more coming in.
Absolutely. Well, good.
Right.
Very-
Pleasing. With the disaster going on.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Everybody kidding the other thing.
Yeah. Historical photos. If you got photos that you'd like to share with the church, and I hope if you've shared them with me, you'll share with the church, because I've enjoyed seeing them. Please get those to Miss Becky. And what I'm thinking about doing is, or what I've talked to Becky about, is not doing it like the slideshow at graduation. We'll do like a PowerPoint where we control how long that picture's up there, so we can talk about it a little bit. Ask questions. Who is that? We'll have some good time there remembering what was going on. So
There's some pictures down in the basement.
yeah, more recent. Yeah, on the bulletin board.
Yeah, like the children.
Yes, ma'am. And some of those are almost 20 years old.
Mhm.
So, or longer. So Mike can snag those too.
There's some in the nursery too, some
Okay.
they're pretty old.
Yep. So good. All right. What else announcements wise? Monthly meeting, obviously this weekend. Community breakfast. I almost missed that. Community breakfast Saturday. Monthly meeting Sunday.
David told me adopt the highway on the 19th. Which is not this Saturday,
All right. Next one.
but the next one.
Adopt a highway. Okay. Probably the last one for the year.
When, next Saturday? Yeah, the 19th.
19. And we usually start about 9 a.m.
Oh, my man.
Yeah. Okay. All right, how about prayer concerns?
My surgery went good.
Nice,
I got checked today and he said it was ill as well.
good,
And we're waiting on when to schedule the next one.
okay.
Thank God.
Can you tell a difference?
A whole lot of difference.
Good. Very nice. We changed 42 May Matthews to hospital, and Debbie talked to me a little bit after church. I guess she's having trouble swallowing. Her neck muscles aren't working quite right. May have to go to Duke. So just be in prayer for her. Anyone else?
Just keep me in prayers.
Okay.
Darla number 2. I think you put that first one. I don't have one. What do we have?
Allie?
Oh, she's good. She's good. She's good. You can take her off. Yes.
Back in
thank you.
April?
Yes.
Okay. Any others?
My sister and her family will be traveling Friday. Coming down here, hopefully.
Okay. From Ohio, correct?
Well, I remember driving in and driving right back out, like, what, that's too long of a drive?
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right, let's take a minute and ask the Lord to bless our time together. Lord, we thank you for another beautiful day. Lord, fall of the year, things starting to change, the weather's changing, the temps are changing, the trees are starting to change, and Lord, it's just another way of showing your handiwork. And so, Lord, I pray you just continue to bless us with it. May we enjoy it. May we see you in nature and just all around us. Lord, I think of the victims of this hurricane in order to pray that you continue to bolster the rescue out efforts, Lord. Be with those that are trying to help people out. Lord, those that are missing, may they be found. Lord, I pray that the assistance that's needed will be given to those that need it most. As some people lost everything. And then, Lord, others, I pray that we'll count our blessings for what we have. And things could have been so much worse. And then, Lord, just around the corner, there's another storm sitting out there ready to hit Florida. And Lord, I pray that, again, you keep people safe. I pray that the workers and emergency responders, Lord, that you watch over them, doctors and nurses that are called to stay and help folks. Lord, again, I just pray that you watch over each and every one of them and keep people safe. And Lord, I pray that as these storms rage, Lord, that people would turn to you. So many times we turn to the government or we turn to others, or there's so many different places we turn, but Lord, may we look up and realize, Lord, that you control these storms, and Lord, you control the storms in our life and in our hearts, and Lord, until we give that over to you, those storms are going to rage. And so, Lord, I pray that you help us to be faithful, help us to be obedient to your word, help us to let others know about what you do for us and what you provide for us. I pray you bless this time together as we look into your word. The study of Ruth, I've already learned so much, and we're only 2 verses in. So, Lord, I pray you continue to bless our time together. I pray for those that are looking at surgery, those that are recovering. Thank you for Kathy's success. And Lord, we pray for the surgery of her other eye that you go just as well. Think of those that are in the hospital, Lord, those that are sick. Pray for each and every one, Lord, that those will be opportunities for you to show your will, and Lord, for us to glorify you in all that we say and do. We ask these things in thy name. Amen. All right, if you got your Bibles, let's turn to the book of Ruth. Robin asked me how far we got. I said verses 1 and 2. So she said she either missed a bunch or not very much. So now's quiz time, right? What did we learn in verses 1 and 2? What'd you learn last week? Anything you didn't know before you came last week that you left knowing?
While they left.
Why did they leave? Good.
Found that out.
Why did they leave? Do you remember? Anybody?
Famine.
Famine. Where did they leave from?
Israel.
Israel, Bethlehem. Good. They left from Bethlehem because of the famine. Where were they headed? Moab. Anyone learn anything about Moab? I learned a lot about Moab. Maybe I'd read it before, but I don't remember. Yeah. Where the Moabites come from?
There's the sons of Lot, there's highly questionable parentage.
Yeah. For Robin's sake, who was the mother of these sons? Lot too. Yeah. And other daughter. So we had Moab, and what was the other one? Ammon. Okay, Ammon. And so, what is the relationship between the Moabites and the Israelites and the Ammonites? Yeah, so the Moabites and the Ammonites a lot of times teamed up against the Israelites, and this all came back from questionable parentage and choices that were made through Lot and his daughters.
I don't know if you heard of it, I volunteered to read, and I got like 2 sentences in, and I was like, I don't recognize what it was.
He's like, why'd I pick these verses? Yeah. Yeah, because they purposely, that was their idea of saving the family name. Was they went in, they got their father drunk and slept with him and became pregnant to save the family name. You know, what's the timetable of the story of Ruth?
Oh, it's during the time of the judges.
During the time of the judges. So, right before the book of Ruth is the book of Judges. So this happened at the same time as the book of Judges. And when a judge, so what was a judge used for? How did God use a judge? What did the judge typically do? Okay, and what did he do though for the Israelites typically? Delivered them, right? They delivered them out of the hand of the people that were oppressing them. And then they would be on their best behavior until then. The judge died. And then what would they do? They'd go back to their old ways of idolatry and just kind of doing what we wanted to. And we looked at Moses and we looked at what Paul said about doing good, right? We shouldn't get tired of doing good and we shouldn't give up on doing good because there is a reward for us. And even though we may not see our reward now, we know that reward's coming. And Moses gave up his position in Pharaoh's house because he knew his place was with his people. And so, we want to do the same thing. So just in review now, as we begin this next part, the book of Ruth, this first chapter is a story of two journeys. The journey from Bethlehem to Moab, and then the journey from Moab back to Bethlehem, okay? The journey from Bethlehem to Moab only takes 2 verses. We're done, all right? But the journey from Moab back to Bethlehem is described in the rest of the chapter, all right? So help me out with something here. Look at verses 1 and 2 again. How many people traveled from Bethlehem to Moab? 4. Who were they? Naomi, Elimelech, and their 2 sons. Good. Chilion, that's how I would say it. Chilion. And then it's, and this is the next question then, right? So where were they from? They were from Bethlehem and they were called what? What's that? What's that? I just want to hear you guys say that word.
Bethlehem, Judah.
Well, what right before that, what are they called with an E? Ephrathites? Yeah, Ephrathites, something like that. And that means that they were from Bethlehem. Bethlehem was from the nation of what? We know this. Where's Bethlehem part of it? Judah, Israel, okay, those things. So now let's read verses 3 through 7. 3 through 7. The story turns on us a little bit. Someone that doesn't mind reading verses 3 through 7 for me.
And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Oprah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left the woman was left with her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughter-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving you bread. No more?
No, you're good. Okay. Actually, yes, one more, sorry. Verse 7.
Where she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah.
Okay. Probably the biggest difference between the journey from Bethlehem to Moab and the journey from Moab to Bethlehem is the difference in the people. Who's the only person to take both journeys? Naomi. Naomi goes both ways. Naomi goes both ways. Though she left with 2 sons and a husband, she comes back with who? Yeah, 2 daughter-in-laws, 2 women who were not of her flesh and blood.
But both of them didn't return, did they? But it's all about the dark, but they can hear. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they may not go all the way back with her, but and we'll look at that, but they start back, I guess. So Naomi's daughter-in-laws, if you jump to chapter 4, verse 10, I think it is. We want to write down, or I'm going to write down, we want to discuss who they are, where they come from, who they're married to. Chapter 4, verse 10. So let's start with Ruth. What nationality was Ruth? A Moabite. And who was her husband? Mahlon, right? Mahlon. And then the other daughter-in-law was Oprah. Not quite, yeah. Orpah, O-R-P-A-H. O-R-P-A-H. That means she was married to Chilion, right? Do we know her nationality? She was a Moabite as well. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. Now, let's jump to Deuteronomy, or go back to, I guess. Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then Joshua. So we're not too far from it. But Deuteronomy chapter 7. Deuteronomy chapter 7. We'll look at verses 3 and 4. You may have a guess, but I want to know why it might have been a problem for Mahlon and Chilion to marry Moabite women. Now, maybe there wasn't a problem. But let's see if there could have been a problem. Someone that doesn't mind reading. Chapter 7, verses 3 and 4.
Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your children away from following me and serve other gods. And the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you.
Ooh. Okay. Let's turn to 1 Kings. Now, this is after Ruth. First Kings. You got First and Second Samuel, and that's First Kings 11, verses 1 through 4. First Kings 11, 1 through 4.
King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been.
Okay. Chase, that's why you only get one. It's 700. 700. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. Crazy. So what could have been problematic for Malon and Chilion here to marry Moabite women? What did Deuteronomy chapter 7 tell us? Don't do it. Why weren't they supposed to do it?
Worship other gods.
Yeah, they pull them away and worship other gods. Now, First Kings 11 took place after the events of Ruth, but it's still the same. It's still the same idea, except we see the consequences here. You know what happened to Solomon? What did it say Solomon's heart was?
Turn away.
Turned away. It was led away from the Lord because of his marriages to women from nations that did not worship the one true God. And at one time, Solomon had it. His relationship with the Lord was right. He had everything going for him. And it deserves special attention that God warnings had nothing to do with certain races. It wasn't a racial thing here, but he warned against his people aligning with nations that had rejected him. We won't take the time, but if you want to clear that up a little bit, you can go to 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and look at verses 14 through 18. But in those verses, basically, that's where Paul writes and says a Christian shouldn't marry a non-Christian. And why was that? You remember? What's the problem? And it wasn't just marriage, it was actually deep covenantal bonds. What's the problem with Christians and non-Christians?
It is not gonna work, I can tell you that.
Why? Why doesn't it work?
Different goals in one life.
We're unequally yoked. What does that mean?
You don't think a lot for you.
We don't think alike. What did the yoke do for the oxen?
I don't work together.
They worked together and they went the same direction, right? If we're unequally yoked, it means that we're able to go our own way. What happens if you're trying to plow a field and the oxen are going different ways? It's not going to work too good. It's just not going to work too good. Now, can you find an example where maybe it did work? Probably, but that's not the way God, that wasn't his pattern for the way we did it. And sometimes we didn't know. Sometimes we just wanted to learn the hard way. And, there's a lot of different reasons. So this isn't a judgmental time for anybody, but, God has a plan. He has a way of doing things. And if we'll follow it, we will be happier by doing that. We're called to love and reach out to all people. But when we attach ourselves to the people that don't follow Christ, our love for him will eventually be compromised. And you can see this in Ruth and Deuteronomy and 1 Kings and in 2 Corinthians. And it will be even greater significance in the coming days. It'll be worse. By the way, that's not just marriage, but that's business and all kinds of things. What's wrong with going into business with a non-Christian? Why not both put in $5 million and start a company? What's wrong with that?
We disagree on another thing.
Yeah, the things you would disagree on. Do you open up on Sunday? Or do you, go like Chick-fil-A? Do ethically, do you do things to cut corners? How do you treat your employees, Or there's just different, we would have different worldviews. We would have different ways of doing things. I see it at different schools and around different teachers. We have different ways of acting. Fortunately, the school I'm at has a good group of Christian teachers, and Forbush, of course, did. But there are others as well. And it wasn't that we weren't friendly with one another, but what's important to them was a little bit different than what was important to me. And the same is true with all of those relationships. So, with that said, why did Naomi decide to return to Bethlehem? So we're back in Ruth now. Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. What does it say? Why did Ruth want to go back to Bethlehem?
Because the famine was over.
Because the famine was over. Verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. Okay. So Naomi had a change of heart of where she was. Now, there were some circumstances that came into play here, but have you ever turned back to God out of desperation or out of necessity? Probably yes to both of those, maybe. Have we turned back to God because we just didn't really have anywhere else to go? Maybe we tried some other places, but then we come back to God because some of these other things didn't work out right. If you'd like to share, you can, but you don't have to, It has a comment in the margin here. It says God's ways are not always the most practical, popular, or unopposed, but they are the most blessed. They are the most blessed. So a desire for bread, a desire for food caused Naomi to leave Bethlehem, and this same desire would lead her back. So the catalyst behind both journeys appears to be a physical need, not so much a spiritual need. However, there's probably some spiritual losses that happened moving to Moab, right? Fellowship, worship, residing in the land. They were all along the way. How many times do we make decisions based on physical circumstances?
All the time.
All the time. Give me a few.
Well, it's one reason I had to quit my job.
Okay. You can't keep up. Okay. What else? What other decisions do we make out of physical needs? I bet you do it every Sunday after church.
Eat.
Yeah, not just to eat. What's the decision we make? Where to eat? That's it. Where are we going to go eat? How long does it take to make that decision? How many of you gather together and pray over it? I don't either. But we're making a decision based on what? Necessity, right? Based on our physical needs and wants. We're not asking the Lord to lead us to the waitress we need witness to. Again, I don't either. Don't throw stones at me. All right. You could though, but we don't. We make things based on physical needs. Most of us work on our houses from time to time. Why? We want a place to live. That's a physical need. What is it? Shelter, food, and what's the other one? Clothing. Yeah. The last pair of shoes you went to buy. Why'd you buy the pair you bought? There you go. Good. We got some in the crowd that feel my pain, and because those are the ones the doctor said would make my feet feel good. I haven't found the right pair yet, Now, some of you do it out of style and different things, but some of us, we do it because our feet hurt. But the question really becomes then is what ultimately dictates our decisions? Is it our circumstances Or is it the God of our circumstances? You know, what dictates? Now you might say, well, Jeff, do we need to pray about where we go eat? You know, I don't know. God says to be in prayer for everything, right? So, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you no or yes. What's the right answer? Do I have to pray for everything? Yeah, I'm not going to tell you no. I think we ought to consider that. I think we ought to think about more than just, where to go eat. But I also understand that, how do you tie God into everything? I mean, that's a challenge we all face. And the challenge of staying committed to God when times are tough and when there's greener pastures just a fence away, is one we understand. And that's what it looked like to Naomi and her family. Moab looked to be the place to go. And then Bethlehem seemed to be the place to go. The feel-good remedies around, abound. I think about people that are lonely. I think about the challenges of singleness. I think about different people that get taken advantage of. And we sit here and we say, how could they ever do that? Well, I hope I never find out, right? But it's that need to have someone around them. And that happens. Clinging to Christ and his promise of company and provision instead of reaching for the many available tonics have been an exercise, that people fail and succeed at. There's both. But his grace helps us when we look more, his grace, I should say, holds us even when we make bad choices, kind of like Elimelech and Naomi, and that's good.
It's been hard for Naomi, like her husband and her sons were buried in Moab,
Absolutely.
but she needed to go back to where where she felt closer to God.
Sure. Yeah, it's not like here where you can, fly the bodies wherever you want them to bury. They were buried in Moab. And she's here now thinking about going back to Bethlehem. Look back at verse 6. From where did Naomi hear that God had come to the aid of his people? Who told her about that? Who told her that God had ended the famine in Bethlehem?
People of Moab.
Oh, the people of Moab. How about that? Right? How about that? Moab. Who's Moab again? Enemies of Israel. People that probably didn't like Naomi, wondered why they were there.
But you gotta think there's probably more Israelites that went.
Probably, yeah. I mean, and maybe they're used to them being around or whatever, but if you study the history, these people didn't get along. But it's the land, the dark and dreaded land of Moab, the land of her family's choosing, that she heard of God's provision. Now think about what that tells us about God. What does that tell us about God? Who did God use to reach Naomi? The Moabites. And who were the Moabites? People against God, people that didn't believe God, people that didn't worship God. And yet God used them to get the message to Naomi, hey, things are all right in Bethlehem now. Maybe you should go back. The echoes of his mercy somehow reached her ears in a place where God wasn't supposed to be heard, in a land that God's goodness wasn't supposed to reach. Has there ever been a time in your life when God pursued you, even brought you back, maybe when you were in a far off place? Can you think of a time in your life when you were maybe like that? Maybe you were far off from God. You had maybe given up on God. Maybe you had moved away from God, but he pursued you and he kind of brought you back, maybe unexpectedly. And what do we learn from that? Whether we've experienced it or know people that experienced it, but I can tell you there's no place too far away that God can't reach. Right? I forget who it was, maybe the psalmist that wrote, he was running away from God, right? Where'd he say, where'd he try to go? It said he tried to climb the highest mountain, and who was there? God was there. He went to the depths of the sea, and who was there? God was there. Think about Jonah in the well, right? Or Jonah in the great fish. God's in the deepest of the oceans. He went to the furthest east and furthest west, and he couldn't escape the hand of God. We can never escape God's presence. So when we look at her return to Bethlehem, it wasn't necessarily out of her longing for God, but for his provision. God had spread his table out regardless of. And we'll discover in this story that he is as generous with grace as he is with the grain. Now, let's turn our attention to Ruth and Orpah, right? Why did they decide to go with her? So Naomi's family moved to Moab out of need to a foreign country, right? Ruth and Orpah are Moabites. They marry these sons, and then their husbands die. And instead of going back to their families and staying in Moab, they want to do what? They want to go back with Naomi. Huh. Why? Okay.
You've got no God, and they don't say about.
Right. The key word right here is, or the theme, one of the themes is return. The word return is a key theme of this chapter. And it's a word that reminds us that it's never too late to come home. It's never too late to come home. If you've had children or, you think about your parents, even though we disappointed them, we could still come home. And the God of grace was welcoming Naomi back to where she belonged. And what is more surprising is that the invitation was extended to her daughter-in-laws from God. I'm talking about. He was preparing. He was preparing them. He was preparing her. Maybe they heard of the God of Naomi. Maybe they had been shared some of the stories and how friendly the people were, or how God took care of them. We don't exactly know, right? But we do know that that God was in all of this. All right, we're going to keep going here a little bit. Let's keep reading a little bit. Let's go. We'll go through verse 14. So let's read verses 8 through 14. Someone that doesn't mind reading. We won't get through all them, but let's look through some of it.
And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And I said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have an husband also to not, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they are grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her.
Okay. When you look at verse 8, and it says, The Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The word kindness doesn't do justice to the Hebrew word that it translates. The Hebrew word is hesed. It's a profound word through the book of Ruth. It happens over and over. And so here's a description of this word, because we'll use it quite a bit. It's a strong relational term that wraps up in itself an entire cluster of concepts, all the positive attributes of God. It's love, it's mercy, it's grace, it's kindness, it's goodness, it's benevolence, it's loyalty, it's covenant faithfulness. In short, that quality that moves a person to act for the benefit of another without respect to the advantage it might bring to the one who expresses it. So it's almost like a sacrificial love, right? So Israel associated Hesed with Yahweh's covenant relationship with her, despite her waywardness. Love, grace, mercy, kindness, all of the positive acts of devotion that flow out of a covenant relationship. So he took care of Naomi in that regard. So when you think of God having this covenant love between him and Israel, how's it significant that Naomi asked God to show Hesed to Ruth and Orpah? Well, it's returning, isn't it? They've shown it to her. God has shown grace and all those other things to her. Now he's asking God to bless them as well. So we'll come back to that for now, but we'll be done for just a minute. So where did Naomi's discussion with her daughter-in-laws take place? Where were they in verse 7?
On the road.
Where?
On the road.
Yeah, wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was. And they were going with her. I mean, she had started. They had packed their bags, they had left their homes, and they'd gotten somewhere down the road. And Naomi begins to urge them to go back. You know, maybe they started fighting. Maybe they started saying, "How much longer?" You know, yeah, are we there yet? And Naomi said, "Hey, look, I love you. And head back home. You know, just head back." But what was the first reason that Naomi she gave them for returning to Moab? What did she say?
Maybe they can find a husband back there.
Yeah, that maybe they could find a husband back there. Yeah. And if you jump all the way to verse 10, who was going with Naomi? Who had decided to go with her? Both of them. Yeah. Naomi realized she had two very determined and committed daughter-in-laws on her hands. And when they didn't respond to her initial nudging, she snipped the threads of their faintest hopes. And she said, "Look, you're following me to Bethlehem because I'm your only hope for another husband. But even if I got married and got pregnant right now and had a son tonight, you'd still have to wait 20 years for him to grow up. And seeing that that's unlikely and a little sketchy, you best just go ahead and cut ties with me, cut your losses, and find you another husband in the land of Moab who can take care of you. And if that isn't enough, the Lord's hand has gone out against me. So there's that." Right? She lost a husband and two sons. Is that who you want to hang out with? You know? So how did that argument work out? What do we notice in verse 14? Okay, they were sad. One left and one didn't. Who left? Who went home? Orpah, right? Orpah went home. She kissed her, which is a sign of, goodbye. And what did Ruth do? She clung to her. She clave to her. There's, when you read verse 14, it's almost like a Hallmark movie, right? They lifted up their voice and wept again. Again, there've been enough crying already. Now there's more crying. But, it's sad when you leave people you love, when you make decisions like that. And, that tells us that in our lifetime, there's going to be some weeping. There's going to be some crying. There's going to be tears. The direction in which we weep is what really matters, and when you look at those verses that we just read, verses 7 through 14, who's weeping going forward and who's weeping going backward? You know what I mean by that? Who's weeping going forward and who's weeping going backwards? Who's going backwards?
Orpah.
Orpah's going back. She's going back to what she came. Okay, Ruth is going forward. She's following Naomi. Naomi's going forward. She's leaving her dead husband where he is and going back. In some ways, she's going backwards, I guess you could say, to her homeland, to her home. So you can make an argument either way for her. But Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Ruth clung to her. Why the different decisions, you think?
And Orpah probably wanted a husband, and Ruth felt like she needed to take care of Naomi.
Okay. Orpah said, you make some good points. I think I want to get married. I want to go back and find me a husband. Ruth very well could have said, I'm the only one that can take care of Naomi right now. I'm going to take care of her. Other ideas. There's not a right answer, so anything goes. What else might have motivated them?
It says that Ruth had mentioned your dog will be my dog.
Yeah. Yeah, she may have been curious still and hey, really wanted to follow this and investigate this God of Naomi's. Could Orpah have just said, I'm tired of Ruth or Naomi telling me to go home. I'm just going to go home? Maybe. We don't know for sure, what their ideas were, but we do know they had different reasons. All right, I think that's a good place to end up right here for tonight, and we'll pick this back up next Wednesday. And we're actually gonna keep looking at this idea of weeping going forward or weeping going backwards with a couple stories in the New Testament. And then as we continue into Ruth, and you can do this if you want, but verses 8 through 15, Naomi urges Ruth to turn back more. There's more times, and it asks us to count them. So maybe you can come up with a number. How many times Naomi tells Ruth to turn back, and see what we come up with. What's the date today? 9th. So this will be 10/16. Half the month will be gone next Wednesday night. Anyone started listening to Christmas music? I heard some yesterday.
Yes, because my granddaughter was singing it.
Your granddaughters are singing it? Yeah.
Get ready for the Christmas.
Yeah, you heard at least one song. That caused us to turn on some other songs.
Jesse came in, apparently they're getting ready for me.
Getting ready for her.
Cause it's, Mele Kalikimaka.
Oh, yeah, that one.
So I'm like, wow.
Merry Christmas in Hawaii. Someone sang that here. Was it Chuck? Chuck and Jacob and maybe Barrett, maybe Little. I remember them. Do you remember them singing that? I think I remember them singing that. All right. Any questions, comments before we close? We got a little further tonight, more than 2 verses. That's good. Okay. Let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for this text in front of us, the story of your grace and your guidance and your hesed, Lord, your kindness and benevolence towards us, even when we don't deserve it. Lord, may we look for that in our lives, and may we be like Ruth and be determined to follow your ways and your path, no matter the cost. And Lord, may we see you in those things and be rewarded for our search. Lord, you say if we look for you, we will find you. You'll be there for us. And so, Lord, I pray that you show yourself real to us. Lord, continue to help us in our faith. May we be obedient to your word. And Lord, may we just learn from the verses we look at each and every week. We ask these things in thy name. Amen. All right. Hope you got something out of it tonight. Nothing else. You learned a new word. I learned a new word. Hesed. Hesed. Hesed.